That's where it starts in the middle of a sentence.
Mm.
Adam, what is the most memorable conversation that you've had about James Joyce?
Oh, it was brief, but I think we had a good conversation after our collective reading of The Dead.
Okay, what? Why did it stand out to you?
Because it was on the back of a kind of much more like collectively immediate experience with the text. It wasn't as if we'd all read the text separately and at different times and like you know different intervals of time had elapsed after having read it. We'd all read it there and then, so it felt much more immediate, fresh.
Yeah, I like that. As so like, I feel like what you're saying is like opposed to like a classroom experience where we all like come and we've like ostensibly like all read it, but in very different ways. But we had like the exact same experience with it. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so that I'd be talking. A lot of people actually end up talking about these like I don't know, like events around Joyce that they had. You know what I mean? Like rather than just like reading the text, their like best moment with Joyce or whatever is like a reading like that we did. Or some people celebrate Bloomsday. Do you have any like other experience like that with any of Joyce's work, where it's sort of like beyond the text?
Yes and no, mostly no, must be said. But we I mentioned that I'd been to see a reading of The Dead in the UK in like a small theatre that's kind of adjacent to the Globe, e.g. Shakespeare's Globe. Um, and that was like a reading by candlelight, just with one single speaker. And I think it must have been on January the 6th as well. It was a while ago, but that was definitely memorable.
Why did you read A Little Cloud?
I read the cloud because to be fully exposed, I asked you what else I should read before this call. I didn't feel like The Dead was enough to bring to the table.
Why
And,
not?
um, I feel there's just a kind of intrinsic. Maybe this is more me than generally, but I feel there's like an intrinsic um, embarrassment talking about an author generally, when only having read one of the texts. I feel like that. I feel that that's quite a strong feeling for me. And you may say that a 16-page short story on top doesn't provide huge amounts of additional insight, but it at least means that there's some comparison possible. And I guess I chose Little Cloud because you gave me a choice of different stories and what you thought, what they thought how you thought they'd be interesting. And if someone says the one I think that you like is this one, I just have to read it. I have to. It's always more fun to follow the recommendation of someone who.
Mm-hmm. Was it actually? Did you actually enjoy it?
I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed it a lot.
Okay.
Um,
I know.
I found it much more just just kind of unflinchingly sad as opposed to The Dead, which obviously is very like it's in a similar arc. Ending feels very crushing as well, but because I guess there was just more in The Dead, it just felt like there was more going on
Mm-hmm.
to slightly dilute the sadness or like slightly nuance that conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Little Cloud, it just felt, because it was shorter and just sparser generally, it felt like more of a punch.
Has there been any moment, maybe especially when you were reading Little Cloud, where you like had a certain idea of like what Joyce's work was, and then that sort of like shifted? Whether that's like I don't know, just like you saw something in the text that was like, oh, I wouldn't expect Joyce to write that, or just like you had a preconception and it was I don't know.
Mm. I'm trying to think back. I think that my preconception would definitely be that my preconception was definitely bound up in all the like stereotypes around Ulysses. And this is maybe even before we read The Dead earlier in the month or earlier in January. Insofar as it's like very formally experimental and therefore difficult. Mm-hmm. And I think rereading the Dead, or when we read The Dead, that was very much like, I wouldn't say surprising, but it was notable for me how actually, as I think we discussed again afterwards, like most of the story is in formal terms relatively straightforward, and like the way that like descriptions and dialogue are rendered isn't overly difficult or surprising or innovative, I guess. And not to say that's a bad thing, but that was, you know, that's probably a good thing when we're reading it as a group. And the same with The Little Cloud. It was kind of not on a stylistic level. Mm-hmm. It wasn't difficult at all.
Okay, that makes sense. So where do you think that your like preconception of like Joyce and his like stylistic difficulties specifically with Ulysses, like where did that come from if you hadn't read Ulysses before then?
I was thinking about this before the call, and I think, embarrassingly or maybe not so embarrassing, I don't know, I think they came from my mum, because I remember her, it must have been a long time ago, she said, I love Virginia Woolf, and I've, you know, always been a fan, but I never got through Ulysses. It's just, I think she may have even used stronger words. She may have, you know, really gone at it as being just difficult for the sake of being difficult, whatever.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, I take what my mum said, so I take it as gospel. So
me too.
I think that's why. No, but obviously then that was like emphasized by you know, having then actually studying English and also German in my undergrad, like seeing numerous references to Joyce's referentiality, his mixing of styles and the narrative styles, and like, all of that was just kind of cemented that initial view.
Okay, and did you like study any Joyce at all in your undergrad?
No.
Okay, that's so interesting to me because he's such like a, I don't know, you know how people talk about like how like a lot of like first year engineering courses are like more difficult than they have to be, just kind of like weed out the weak ones. I feel like that was like very much in my undergrad experience. It was like kind of like beginning of second year, you gave people Joyce to kind of like see if they would stick it out. But
and you definitely took the challenge head on.
I did. I did kind of hate it sometimes.
No, because my undergrad was in French and German literature.
Okay.
I was there are some German modernists who are compared to Joyce. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying this is because they were compared to Joyce, but I actually also didn't tackle them either.
Oh. Just not a fan.
No, I think it's a really simplistic differentiation, but I think I don't know. I obviously have really enjoyed reading Woolf, and on the German side, like other similar voices who are like not so formally challenging, but still like explore consciousness, I guess, and expression in interesting ways. And so I've kind of always thought that I should stay on that side of the modernist line. I mean, that's obviously super simplistic, but
no, it makes sense. It makes sense. I feel like there definitely is I don't know. Sometimes it feels a little bit like reductive when people are just like, especially like seeing Joyce as sort of like this like pinnacle of like the modernist movement, and like, oh, everybody was just kind of like doing what he did but slightly easier, so let's just go with them, you know what I mean? I don't think that that's useful. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who is James Joyce? And I feel like you've kind of given us an idea, you know what I mean, of like, you know, like where he fits in and like how people talk about him and stuff. But like in your conception, even based on that sort of like contextualizing that we do of him, like who is James Joyce?
Oof. Yeah, I guess I wouldn't have said, maybe I wouldn't have said that he's like, as you were saying, people often do, that he's like the pinnacle of a modernist movement, but he's definitely a high modernist who, yeah, is obviously just very influential in the novel and the short story. He's Irish, who a lot of people, he has a lot, like a lot of people know about.
Okay. Is there something that like stands out about Joyce particularly? Is like this author that like a lot of people sort of like know his name even if they haven't read his work? Or I don't know if that's what you were saying. That's just kind of what it sounded like.
No, I mean, it must, I don't know, it's difficult to like, to detract or to pull apart my own understanding from what I think other people's would be, but I do think that that Ulysses is what Ulysses and its challenges is like what he's
doing. So then what is Ulysses, do you think? Like, I think you've described it as a novel, but I don't know, why is it, you know, sort of like his one work that a lot of people think of? Or maybe it's even like more famous than him and people know about Ulysses without being aware of like Joyce or even modernism, you know?
I feel a bit in some sense that because particularly in the kind of scholarly context or whatever, like the length of a work and its level of difficulty is often understood to be kind of marks of its quality or its kind of value. So it wouldn't be if I don't have any evidence for this, but if it was shown that that was the text that people knew most of his and were most kind of form their opinion on him as a writer most through that text, it wouldn't surprise me just because it's by far his longest, and I think, I mean, you'll correct me, but by far his like most innovative in formal terms. And I think those things do just yeah, those things kind of draw more attention to a work than, I don't know, in comparison to say Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man or whatever.
I feel like there's always an interesting mix because I totally agree about like the length thing, but like on the formal end of things, like he also wrote Finnegans Wake, which is just like, I don't know if you've ever like even just like looked at the first page. Okay, hold on. I just don't know how else to describe it except for like showing people what it looks, because it's just like, it's not, well, it's like supposed to be read aloud, you know what I mean? Like so it doesn't have any like, honestly, beyond Ulysses like a gabillion times, like it makes Ulysses look easy. I don't know. And so it's just, I'll show you the first page, and you've read the first couple pages of Ulysses, so you can maybe compare in your mind. This is the first page of Finnegans Wake. That's where it starts, in the middle of a sentence. And yeah, I don't know, it just is like not English really. I talked to a guy yesterday who was memorizing Finnegans Wake. Very interesting. I don't know, actually quite cool. And how he described it was like, it's kind of like reading sheet music where you have to like study it and practice it and take it slow and repeat it over and over again to get it. So anyway, I just find it interesting because I totally agree with you that like when I approached Ulysses for the first time, I had this idea of like, okay, like if I read Ulysses, I've read like the most difficult novel, you know, of the 20th century, whatever. And like, not even of the 20th century, but just of this one author. There's this like you know what I mean, like weirder, more difficult, or like more
Yeah,
like
definitely.
stylistically like challenging book. So yeah, I'm just not sure if like Finnegans Wake is almost just like too
It
like
goes too far, yeah.
up. Yeah. And so then it's just like, no, Ulysses is the hardest, so we don't have to talk about the Wake. But yeah.
Were those underlinings also part of the text?
No, I think that that's
Okay.
just, yeah. I'm just looking now. I think they were just like offering, you can like click on it and get a little like annotation.
Mm. But I think that that is maybe an interesting point. There's a threshold, even
Ooh.
the scholarly community, or like not even English students, can handle,
Mm-hmm.
and that is just, it's just insanity or whatever like that. Just, which I feel like is true of other authors as well. Like that, some of their works are just like
Too far.
much. But I don't know. I think with Ulysses as well, the fact that it has a kind of, it's like narrative time of one day, also
Mm-hmm.
as a kind of, I don't want to call it a USP, but you know, something memorable about like
Yeah.
the way the book functions that sticks in people's minds as well. You know, I'm just thinking on like a really, I don't know, conversational level where people exchange facts about books they don't know. If you know what I mean?
Yes, yes, for sure.
And like, you know, the memorable things that people do choose to pick out and know about,
Mm-hmm.
which is the fact that it's over one day. And that feels, because of the length, I guess as well, in combination with the length, that feels like a salient fact of error, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's one of those things of like, you don't even have to have read it, but you get to sound, you know, like, you know that this gigantic book only takes place in one day. And that's like a really weird thing to know.
For sure. Yeah.
Some people think that Finnegans Wake is like, because at the end of Ulysses, the like character whose like mind we're in like the last chapter is like falling asleep. So some people think that Finnegans Wake is like her dream. So it like also it just like takes place like the night after, and you can like read them like right into the next. And that's why Finnegans Wake is so confusing, because it's in like dream language or whatever. I don't know, man. It just sounds
That
so.
sounds like a theory of just Joyce maniacs who just don't want to stop. You just want to keep going.
Yeah, just reread them over and over again. But yeah, so I don't know, it's weird. Yeah, there's that. I can definitely see what you're saying about the threshold of like the people that I've talked to who have like managed to go beyond that threshold have like a completely different understanding of like
Mm.
what Joyce is and like how Ulysses fits in, because I don't know, it becomes like not really the main thing to them anymore.
I wanted to ask you what you, if your kind of research on Joyce would take a comparative turn,
Mm-hmm.
which author would you put up against Joyce's for that process? I guess that also depends on what you're researching about Joyce. But
Yeah. No, I mean, I had this exact conversation with Alan Hepburn a couple days ago. So I'm starting to have
okay.
good answers. No. So I mean, I think for me, like the approach that I'm taking for my like master's research anyway, that I think is really handy, is sort of like finding something content wise where they do the same thing. So the one that currently the plan is to roll with for my like MARP is like the sacrament of confession, because Joyce represents that, or like his characters think about it a lot. And so then sort of looking at like other 20th century authors, or if you need to narrow it down, sometimes it's really handy to use like other 20th century Irish authors, and being like, how do they represent it, and why does Joyce represent it in this like really weird like prose sort of like in the back of people's minds thoughts, whereas like I don't know, Seamus Heaney for example like writes a little like poem about it, you know what I mean, like, and like how is that representation of this like thing this like act, I guess, um like why is everyone doing it but in such different ways.
Yeah.
I think yeah,
Sounds pretty interesting.
well, hopefully hopefully the whatever our department thinks so too. but yeah, I think that that's I don't know. I think that the whole thing of like Joyce and his contemporaries, especially like as like, oh, who are the modernists, is kind of so overdone. You know what I mean? Like I get why it's important to do the whole like Joyce and like Yeats and Sing and Wolf. Like,
Mm.
yeah, they're like important stylistic comparisons to be made, but I think it's kind of like graduate level students can't really do that anymore. So you have to kind of shift
Yeah,
it.
fair. No, I agree. I agree. I agree.
So I was just wondering if there will be anything memorable for you from this conversation that we've had. Any little fun fact that you didn't know, or just like something that like changed in your mind a bit.
But certainly seeing Finnegans Wake
Okay.
on the page was that would have been, I would have been interested to talk more about that and to read more about that. But that was a complete shock.
Okay.
Because I mean, I'd heard about, you know, some of the innovations in Ulysses, but that just seemed to be, as you said, that seems to be beyond the threshold,
Okay.
or beyond a threshold.